Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a multi-award winning director and choreographer who's brought us some of the most beloved and iconic musicals in the past 40 years. After dancing in Broadway shows including Rogers Follies, Brigadoon, and On Your Toes, he's gone on to choreograph dozens of shows on Broadway, in London's West End, and for touring productions. He choreographed the world premiere of the musical Jeckyll and Hyde. He was the choreographer for many Broadway shows, including The Full Monty, Hairspray, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Legally Blonde, Pretty Woman, the musical, and Kinky Boots and On Your Feet, which he also directed. He choreographed the Broadway revivals of Grease, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, The Rocky Horror Show, Gypsy, and Cage aux Folles. He's been nominated for 8 Tony Awards and won 2 for Best Choreography for Kinky Boots and Cage aux Folles, for which he also won a Drama Desk Award and an Outer Critics Circle Award. He's also received 4 Laurence Olivier Award nominations, 6 more Drama Desk Award nominations, and 3 more Outer Circle Award nominations. In addition to his work in the theater, our guest directed the movie versions of Kinky Boots, the musical, and Legally Blonde, the musical. He was also the choreographer for a number of movies, including Scent of a Woman, In and Out, The Object of My Affection, One True Thing, and Hedwig and the Angry Inch. On TV, he's choreographed numerous shows, including the 2004 Tony Awards, the 2016 live performance of Hairspray, and he got an Emmy Award nomination and won an American Choreography Award for his work on The Drew Carey Show. In Las Vegas, he created, directed, and choreographed Peep Show, the longest running live show at Planet Hollywood. And on top of all that, this incredibly generous man created and for many years directed the hugely popular annual Broadway Bears burlesque and comedy extravaganza for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, a vitally important fundraising organization within the theater community that has raised over $25 million for AIDS-related causes across America. If you're not familiar with Broadway Bears, you must get our guest's wonderful book about this annual show entitled Backstage Pass. And in recognition of his dedication and contributions to Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, as well as his 3 decades of volunteer service through the arts, our guest will be receiving the prestigious Isabel Stevenson Award at the upcoming Tony Awards on June 11th. I'm delighted and deeply honored to welcome the incomparable Jerry Mitchell to our show. Jerry, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Harvey. Can I take you everywhere I go?
Absolutely.
That was quite an introduction.
Well, you deserve it and so much more. I've watched a number of your interviews over the years, Jerry, and I love hearing you talk about the reason behind every dance step in your choreography. Tell me why that's so important.
For me, choreography is always about telling the story or trying to add to the story of the musical. So I find myself when I'm talking about my own choreography, when I'm just doing steps, it only keeps my attention for about 10 or 15 seconds, 20 seconds tops. Then something has to change in the choreography. Something has to evolve. And, it's usually trying to help the character celebrate whatever the character's celebrating, if it's purely an entertaining number, or helping the character come to some sort of realization through the choreography or expression through the choreography. So telling the story or having a story behind the movement, I learned that from Jerry Robbins, really, and Michael Bennett. They were choreographers who, there was an interesting article in the New York Times this week talking about, it didn't really talk about it because none of them are choreographers. But the truth of the matter is choreography has to tell a story. And when it doesn't tell a story, it has to entertain the audience. Those are the 2 things it needs to do. And Jerry Robbins and Michael Bennett, they didn't really have a style. They were storytellers. The story predicted the style they would use to use in their choreography to tell the story. Fosse had a very specific style, and he used it in every one of his shows. It's the same style always in every show. Every show. It's in every show, right? That is a style, and that is equally as magnificent. But there are differences. And, there's no comparison between the moves in King and I and the moves in Fiddler, other than they're both brilliant. So, yeah, that is really what, for me, choreography is about: telling the story, moving the story forward, and entertaining the audience.
When I watch one of your shows, and I think I've seen most of them on Broadway, the dancing is indispensable to the storytelling, and it's very carefully integrated into the score and the script so that the audience sees the true meaning behind the steps and everything is seamless. Is that the defining characteristic of what makes great choreography in a musical theater production?
Well, you've asked two questions there: choreography and basically what I'm going to just say is transitions. Musicals, that when we see a musical today, we don't bring in the front cloth and change the set and lift the front cloth and go, okay, we're in a new scene. We do things a vista because we're used to video and television and film. Michael Bennett so brilliantly did that in Dreamgirls with his designer Robin Wagner, by just using scenery to change the size of a space. So you could see the characters in different shapes and sizes with very little information coming from the scenery. It was only about the space in which the characters were inhabiting. And that was what he really was going for. But it was seamless. There was a seamlessness to the writing and to his work as interpreting that writing. That all changed around then. Musicals became seamless. Tommy's done it, Stroh's done it. We all have to do it because audiences won't sit still. And there's a craft to making seamless transition. There's a real craft to it. You need great writers. When Mark Shaman and I were working on Hairspray, and I realized in the rehearsal room, I said, Mark, I've got every actor on stage at the end of Welcome to the 60s, and every actor has to make a costume change and be on stage at the top of the next scene, which is Dodgeball. How are we going to do that? I said, we need a transition. And in the room, in 5 minutes, we made up one of the greatest transitions I've ever had the pleasure of doing with Jack O'Brien and Mark and Scott. We made up the Dynamite's playoff in Hairspray, which brought the house down, but gave everyone else time to run into the wings, change clothes, and come back on, as 16 pieces of scenery changed on stage. But you were focused on these three girls singing their hearts out. And we had reached a part in the story where Black music and Black performers were taking over. And that's what that transition did.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I remember it distinctly. When you're considering whether to get involved in a musical theater project, Jerry, do you start by listening to the music first, or do you read the story first?
I read the story first. If I listen to the music, I will get sucked into the show because I love all kinds of music, and music inspires me and makes me want to move. So I've learned to read first if there's a story to read. And sometimes I get asked to do a project, many projects, transfers from film to the stage. And I have to love the original source material in some way and believe there's a way for it to have a life and live theatrically. Yeah, so I usually read or listen or watch the story first.
You had a very close working relationship with Jerome Robbins. You were his assistant on Jerome Robbins' Broadway, which was a compilation in 1989 of Jerome Robbins' greatest works from shows like West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof, The King and I, and many others. And your job was to learn and reproduce all of his original choreography. What would you say was the most important thing you learned from that experience?
Well, Jerry was a stickler for story. And, I had done probably 5 productions of West Side Story all over the world before I met Jerry Robbins. And some of those productions used his original choreography. But until I learned the choreography from him and the reason behind the steps and what was happening and why he chose those steps, it was like learning it all over again, learning it finally from the horse's mouth. There was one instance I turned and I had my leg in passe. So my foot was up to my knee and I was doing the turn in cool or something. And he looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing the turn." He said, "No." He said, "They're not ballet dancers. These are boys on the street." He said, "Put your foot on the ground and drag it behind the other foot. Just drag it." He said, "I don't even care if you point it. Just drag your foot." And so that specific direction in the placement of my foot was tenfold in every step you made. And I took that and I learned from him so much about telling the story through choreography. There was a ballet called the Dreams Come True ballet, which he actually cut. He didn't put it in Jerome Robbins Broadway, but we learned it. And Charlotte D'Amboise was playing the girl reading Photoplay magazine, and as she turned to the pages of Ramon Navarro or Gary Cooper, they would pop out from behind the couch, and she'd do a little black and white sort of silent movie choreography story. And there was one scene where the Ramon Navarro was a sheik and she was a princess and Cleopatra, and she had to pour wine in a goblet and put poison from her ring and hand it to him. This is all done in choreography and pantomime. There's no real goblet. There's nothing. And I'm rehearsing it and learning it with Jerry Robbins in the room. And I take the cup and I drink it and I die. And he stops me. He goes, "No, no, 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 no. You're not dying right." He said, "You have to die with intention." And so he grabs the imaginary cup from me. First of all, there was no cup, which was already amazing. And he says, "Play the music." And he starts to drink it and he dies this elaborate death. And I had brought my dog to rehearsal that day. I had a golden retriever, Pokey, and he loved dogs. And you could bring your dog to the dance studio. My dog was under the stage manager's table on a leash and he was just resting. And Jerry died. And my dog looked up at Jerry's dying scene and he went, "Oh, oh, oh." He started whining. And I thought, "You even convinced my dog." That's how committed he was to the movement and the acting in the choreography. And to me, that was just brilliant. It was an eye opener for me.
I think what I hear you saying is that he taught you truth to make every step true to the character.
Well, he also said once, "I would rather have an actor who could dance than a dancer who doesn't understand acting." And that was a really important statement to learn when you were a young kid choreographing, that the acting of the choreography is as important as the steps.
Yeah, he really was all about commitment and he was a master at pulling the comedy out of physical
Oh my
movement.
God.
And
He was so good at comedy, physical comedy, and finding out how to make dance funny. He was brilliant at it.
while you're exceptionally gifted at finding the human comedy in the physical movement, and I now know that you learned that from him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, having been an assistant and associate choreographer for people like Jerome Robbins and Michael Bennett, what do you look for when you're hiring an assistant or an associate?
Passion, attack, people who just want to be in the room more so than anywhere else on earth, right? Because the creating a musical takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And you have to have people in the room who aren't afraid to be in that room working 24/7, 7 days a week for years, sometimes years. You have to want to be in that room. And Lin-Manuel wrote the song in the room where it happens. You have to want to be in that room.
I would think that one of the most difficult things about what you do is getting the images of what you see in your head onto the stage.
Without question.
And I would
That was
imagine,
Fosse. Fosse said that in an interview, and I always quote it because it is the challenge to when I listen to the music and I start to form images of what I want to do choreographically, and I put those images, I try to get them out of my head on bodies. And the thing I've learned the most as I've aged in this business is not to edit myself, to actually finish getting the image out and let the image be complete and now start to edit, right? And that's a really important lesson to learn, to just finish the work and then you can edit it. Then you can go with your eraser and change, cut, paste, but get it finished. And, like in Kinky Boots, when I was creating the conveyor belt number, there was a whole nother section that I cut out of the number because I felt like that audience was going to be ahead of me and figure out the tricks of the conveyor belt if I let it go on too long. And so I cut a big chunk of it out. And we were in Chicago, and the number went off like gangbusters. And the producers had been questioning people in the audience, and they went, more dancing, more of the conveyor belt number, more and more. And they begged me to make it longer. And I said, no, 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 a good musician never shows his hand. I said, I am not going to make it longer. If it's working just the way it is. Let's keep it that way.
That's a brilliant judgment call. I would imagine that you have to be extremely specific when you're giving instruction to the cast members. And I'm sure you're well aware, Jerry, that there are legendary stories about some choreographers being mean and dictatorial and even tyrannical, probably out of frustration with themselves. But
always out of frustration with themselves, always. At least it was with Jerry Robbins. He was never really angry at the dancer, although it may have appeared that way and it may have manifested itself in that way. He was mostly angry with himself, angry that he couldn't figure it out and that it took him so much time to get it right. He was a stickler for detail. And when he couldn't figure it out, he would be just so furious with himself.
well, the thing about you do not have a reputation for being that way with your dancers. How do you keep yourself in check in managing your frustration when things just aren't going right?
I don't really know. I just love dancers and I was a dancer. I was a dancer. So I rely on them. If something isn't going right, I usually ask myself three questions. Is it me? Is it the step? Is it the idea? And I just tick one off after the other. And often, one of the other great, great lessons I learned from Michael Bennett was you can dance and create something spectacular. And then you put it on an actor's body. And if they aren't doing it the way you do it and feel it, then it's probably not right for them. And you have to change it to make them look the way you feel when you do it. Because if they don't look great doing it, you don't look like you know what you're doing as a choreographer.
Well, you're known for being collaborative and creating a sense of community among your cast. And there's an old saying that your dear friend Jack O'Brien used to say, sometimes a great idea comes from the usher. Have you ever been surprised by an idea that came to you from an unlikely source?
Oh, no, not at all. I trust the instincts of the people I hire to interpret the story. I really do. I'm not hiring them to tell them. God, I never hire anyone and expect that I'm going to perform the entire show for them and then they're going to mimic me. Although I often get up and demonstrate by performing, but I do expect them to bring their instincts because their instincts will only fuel the story and the piece, and it will give them investment in the piece. So when I'm away after we open and the show's done, they've invested in that performance. They've invested in that creation. So they have something to play.
When your friend Billy Porter was asked what makes you so special to work with, he said it was your joy, that you're such a joyful person. Jerry, where does that joy, that positive energy, where does it come from?
I think it's just that I'm so fortunate to be in this business and doing what I love to do. I mean, I'm always excited about the next day's rehearsal and the challenge of trying to figure out what it is we're going to do.
Are there times when you consider the dance steps in a show to be a form of dialogue between the characters?
Always. I mean, choreographers write with their feet. That's our job.
Well, it's been said by more than one theater critic, I'm sure you know, that your dancing and your choreography are based on emotion, not technique. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of my favorite shows that you did was the Full Monty because you were dealing
Oh,
with
God.
characters who were not dancers and who had to learn to dance during the show. There's a number called Michael Jordan's Ball that's just brilliant. Now,
Yeah.
I know you come from a sports family. Did that background playing basketball as a kid help you come up with the choreography for that number?
Absolutely.
It did.
Absolutely. Yeah. The song originally, in the original writing, David Yazbek had put that song in the second act. And we were struggling to figure out how we were going to end the first act. In the film, the guys go to a store and they steal a videotape of Jennifer Beals dancing to Flashdance, and then they watch it, and that they kind of try to get their moves from watching that video. And that was the way the script had originally, Terrence and David had written that scene at the end of Act One. And there was an imaginary girl who came out dressed like Jennifer Beals, and she danced around the room. And I staged that whole thing, and I said, this isn't really an end of the act. There's nothing exciting happening here. It's not I don't want to watch a girl do flash dance. I want to watch the guys try to dance. And I said, what? And I suggested we take the song, Michael Jordan's Ball, put it at the end of the act, and let Jerry, the character Jerry, Patrick Wilson, convince the boys that they can dance if they just apply their sportsmanship to dance. So now I had an idea, I had a story, and the steps were the easiest part because I played basketball my whole life. So, I just created basketball steps. And then I had the brilliant Zane Marks dance arrangement, which took me into this big band, dirty big band. Bum, and we were bouncing the ball and passing around. And those boys were great actors. So I was able to use their acting ability to imagine a ball, and they were great at it. And all of that came, much of that idea came because I had had that experience with Jerry Robbins telling a story through pantomime with the Dreams Come True ballet. Because of that experience, I knew I could create a number using pantomime and guys who really couldn't dance at all. I mean, the guys were not dancers. They'd be the first to admit it, maybe with the exception of Andre de Shields, but they really weren't dancers. They were singers and actors who moved.
I love the fact that Jerome Robbins lives on through you, that we still benefit from his expertise through you and others that he taught.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there isn't a choreographer on Broadway who's working who hasn't been influenced by him directly or indirectly in some way.
Now, you choreographed the 2003 revival of Gypsy starring Bernadette Peters, which I really loved. There were distinct differences in the choreography between that show and the 1989 revival starring Tyne Daly, which I also saw.
Yeah.
How do you decide what choreography to keep from the original and what to introduce as totally new and fresh in your production?
I knew that I wanted to do the whole strip thing with Louise differently in my own way because I'm just such a fan of burlesque anyways, and I had loved that idea. So when Sam asked me, we agreed that would be a new take. And then the all the other stuff, I really didn't know the original choreography of a lot of that stuff. The things I did know that I learned from Jerry when we did Jerome Robbins Broadway were All I Need Is the Girl and Broadway, Broadway, how great you are, Dainty June's Newsboy number. So and Arthur had asked me if I would recreate All I Need Is the Girl. He loved the number, thought it was, well, I loved the number, and he thought it was you just couldn't do better than Jerry's original choreography for it. So I said, absolutely, I'd be proud to recreate it. One of the funniest things about that show was the young kids. Eamon Foley, who's now a choreographer of his own, who was in the ensemble, and the other boys and the girls, Heather Teepee, they were such babies. And when we got into the theater at the Schubert Theater, they said, Jerry, you're the choreographer. Who's this other person? Jerry Robbins is listed as a choreographer too. These poor kids didn't even know who Jerry Robbins was. So I went out during the break they had a DVD player in their room when they're not on stage. I went out during the break and I bought The King and I, Fiddler on the Roof. I bought all the DVDs that I could of Jerry's work. And I gave it to them and I told them, you have to watch these. And then I want you to write a report on it for me. I want your report on your choreographer who's not here. So I was just thinking to myself, these poor kids, they didn't even know who he was.
Wow, what a way to learn, though.
Amazing.
Sometimes a big star is brought into a Broadway production because it will sell tickets, but they can't dance very well. Now, I know Gypsy is not a good example because I think Mama Rose has maybe 6 steps in that whole show. But generally speaking, is that a challenge for you to adjust the choreography to fit the capabilities of the star?
No, I think it's actually a plus for the choreographer to be able to work with someone who doesn't dance and bring their natural movement into the number. Harvey Firestein and Dick Latessa is a perfect example. The timeless number in Hairspray, they didn't dance at all, and not really. And I got a chance to work with them and make this charming, charming show-stopping number, beautiful number written by Mark and Scott. And I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. John Lithgow, who is, I think, one of the best dancers I've ever worked with, who's a big star, and he loves to dance, but he's not a trained dancer. He's a guy who loves to dance, and he will work his butt off to dance for you. Norbert Leobat, same thing. Norbert's not really a trained dancer, but Norbert can do anything you throw at him. He just does it like Norbert. And that's kind of what's brilliant about it.
Yeah, that's for sure. I want to ask you about Kinky Boots, which is such a joyful show. Is it true that Cyndi Lauper wrote the song Everybody Say Yeah for you?
Well, we didn't have the song. Again, here's an example of us working on a new musical, and we're making it up as we go. And we're at the end of the act, and I knew I wanted to do a celebration of the boot and the factory workers coming together to celebrate that first boot coming down the line. And she said, "Well, what's it about?" And I said, "It's about everybody saying, 'Yeah, we did it. Yeah, we made it. Yes, this is the boot.'" And she went off and wrote "Everybody Say Yeah."
Jerry, you're well known for your instincts when it comes to casting. I watched an interview with Annalee Ashford, who's been in at least 2 or 3 of your shows. She said that she was auditioning steadily for a few years and couldn't get a job. And then you hired her in Hairspray, and then everything started happening for her. Matthew Morrison and Chester Gregory both said exactly the same thing. What did you see in these people that everybody else missed?
When I'm well, first of all of them are brilliant stars, right? And so many of the people who were in Hairspray and Legally Blonde were, just starting out, and then they have huge careers. So I'm always looking for someone who matches the material in a believable way. That's all. You're looking for the person who really comes in, and when they say the lines or sing the notes, you believe them. That's it.
Authenticity.
That's it. You got to believe them. And sometimes it's a fit and sometimes it isn't. Norbert Leo Butz, when he came in and auditioned for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and Jack and I just looked at each other and went, "Well, that's it. He's the part." And it was just perfect.
You're quite clearly a very intuitive person. And I would imagine that over the years, you've learned to trust your own judgment when it comes to your creativity. You clearly know what you're good at. How did you develop that confidence in yourself?
It's it's I don't know. It's tricky. along with that confidence comes a lot of doubt. You're constantly questioning your choices, constantly going through your list and just going. Sometimes it's process of elimination. Sometimes it's exactly what you want it to be. And the great thing I've learned from people like Terrence McNally and Jack O'Brien is you've got it. You can always change it, right? You can always change it if you don't like it, and you can put it over here, write a new song, do a new dance, do a new scene. And then if that doesn't work, you can go back to what you had. You've got to take the chance on something. Otherwise, you'll never know if it's right. Jerry Robbins, when we were doing Jerome Robbins Broadway, it was a 2-year rehearsal process, literally a 2-year rehearsal process. And we had done, I don't know, we were in the third or fourth 6-week workshop, and he was working on the town number. And he had choreographed this ballet, and it was a big, long ballet. And he cut the whole thing. He came in one day and cut the entire thing out and started over. And I was like, what are you doing? He said, it's not right. It's not right. He'd gone back to see Fancy Free, and he came back in and he started with a piece of Fancy Free and took off from there. But it wasn't what he wanted, and he was messing about and messing about and messing about, as he said. And he said, I just needed to start fresh. So he did. And I always say to myself, if Jerry Robbins can throw a whole number out after 6 weeks, so can I.
Well, how important is it in your creative process to have a strong group of friends and colleagues whom you can turn to for critique and advice, people that you know will tell you the truth?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. It's why directors and choreographers begin to surround themselves with creative teams and working teams that they can trust, because suddenly the walls are broken down and the truth is easier to talk. It's easier to talk about it. No one does a musical to make it a terrible show. Everyone's in the room to make it a hit. That's the goal. Everybody comes into the room with that goal in mind. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If any of us had the exact key, every show we did would be running for forever.
Of
It
course.
just isn't the case.
When I think of the shows you've brought to us, the messaging is so universal and still so current. Look at Hairspray. That show, which is saying basically, why can't we all just dance together, is just
Yeah.
as relevant now, if not more so, than when
Yeah.
it first came out. It's very clear that you're drawn to shows that have messages of unity and hope and social justice and compassion. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Well, most musicals, you could put most musicals in that category, really. I think it was Michael Bennett who first said to me, I don't want to do a musical unless it gives people hope at the end of the show. And I sort of feel the same way. And what is that? I'm always looking for a universal idea in a musical, because I say it's a lot like fishing with a net. If you throw the net out and you've got a universal idea inside of it, you're going to get a lot of fish in that net as you pull it back. If you throw it out with just any old idea, you might catch a few fish, but will it continue? Will it meet many minds, right? And what is, Mamma Mia, which I had nothing to do with, which I love, but it was basically about a simple, 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 very universal idea. A young girl is getting married and she wants her father to walk her down the aisle. Here's the problem. Who's the dad? That was the musical. Everybody can relate to that idea.
Well, not many people have trouble knowing who their father is.
No, but everybody can relate to the idea of someone wanting their father to walk them down the aisle. The dilemma was she needed to find out who her father was. So there's the story.
I can't resist asking you, what was it like to choreograph Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman?
He was in tango lessons when I met him, and he was taking authentic tango lessons, and he was frustrated because he couldn't remember what any of the steps were, because basically he was being led around the floor. And so I said to the producer and the director, what we need to do is we need to create an 8 counts, teach it to him, repeat it 10 times, then put on the next 8 counts, teach it to him, repeat that 10 times. And just that's how you choreograph. You add another 8. And so by the end of the first day, I had taught him half of that tango. He was so excited that he could remember it and do it again. He said, do you want a cappuccino? He's bought me a cappuccino. And the producer put some cash in my pocket and said, you've saved my life. And because he wanted to cut the scene because he was getting so frustrated. And he was absolutely lovely. I saw him in LA just recently. We had a little chat at the hotel. We were staying at the same hotel, but he's lovely, lovely guy.
You worked with Andrew Lloyd Webber in the London production of Love Never Dies. I remember hearing you say that that show was the most challenging show you've ever worked on. Why?
Well, it was challenging because Jack and I were in the room without the writers. So you can't do a new musical unless the writers are in the room with you. At least I can't. I can't do that unless the writers are in the room with me. So, you need the writers in the room every day for the entire rehearsal process to create a new musical. And they weren't in the room.
It felt like the story just wasn't finished.
No, it wasn't. And it needed to be finished.
You've been involved in some shows like Never Gonna Dance, which should have been a huge, huge success, but for some reason it just didn't make it. Why does that happen?
Like I said, if we had the answer, every show we do would be a hit and run for forever. Sometimes you never know. It just doesn't spark. It doesn't hit.
Now, I know you've done some reality television. In 2008, you became the mentor on the dance competition show Step It Up and Dance. Are you a fan of shows like Dancing with the Stars?
Oh, yeah. I think they're incredible. Any show on national television that celebrates dance in any form, in any way, I'm 100% for it.
Would you ever want to be a judge on a dance competition show?
Oh, well, it's not something I aspire to, no, but if I were offered the job, I might take it.
I think you'd be amazing.
Well, I'm pretty busy doing musicals most of the time.
Well, as you well know, it takes enormous stamina and discipline to be a dancer in a Broadway show 8 times a week and deliver the consistency of performance that you, as a director and choreographer, want to see.
Yeah.
In recent years, there's been a deterioration in the level of discipline from what there was when you were a dancer on Broadway, don't you think?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if there's a deterioration. I always say you need 4 things to be successful: determination, drive, discipline, and desire. Right? So I can only speak for myself. My desire to be in the room, my desire to be working on a musical, my desire to be there 24/7 outweighs everything else pretty much in my life. I have a wonderful husband who supports me and understands that desire, that passion that feeds me in ways that only that passion can. And he supports that. So, I think everyone's different and everyone has their own, life to live, and they should live it with commitment and desire and passion, right? And my life is in the theater. It's always been in the theater, and it will probably always be in the theater.
And what a blessing that is for us. There used to be a time when Broadway shows always had original music, and many songs from Broadway shows became commercial hits.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of jukebox musical out there, like Mamma Mia, Jersey Boys, The Cher Show, Ain't Too Proud, Beautiful. What do you think of the jukebox musicals?
I think if they're done well, they can be very entertaining. And by the way, those shows are making musicals out of songs that were hits, already are hits, right? Even the contemporary ones like Anne Juliet is all about the hit shows that these young people know. I mean, they're sensational. And then you have Hamilton and Six, which have got their own scores, which have become hits on the radio, on the streaming services, like the Rogers and Hammerstein hits used to be. So it really hasn't changed. It's just shifted in another way. Now shows are using hits that have existed for years and years and years, but there are new shows that are producing those kinds of hits that are on Spotify, tearing up the charts.
Now, Jerry, I have to take a moment. As I mentioned in my introduction, you created the Fabulous Broadway Bears show, which has raised over $25 million to help AIDS victims. You're about to receive the Isabel Stevenson Tony Award for your lifetime of community service. Jerry, for men of our generation who lived through the worst of the AIDS epidemic, there are simply no words to tell you how much your generosity means to all of us. It's really a great honor to be able to thank you for that publicly and to congratulate you on your upcoming award.
It was a bit overwhelming when I heard the news. First of all, I knew who Isabel Stevenson was. And, you know, when I started Broadway Bears, I started it out of necessity, out of my own necessity, to bring my friends together and for all of us to have a way to shout back at this awful thing that was taking friends and family members and feel like we were participating in the battle to beat it as opposed to just succumb to it. And also I was very young, and you know, safe sex was an important survival tactic at the time, and when there were no drugs and there was nothing else to help you. And that message needed to be made loud and clear so people would make smart choices and still be sexual but make smart choices in their life and raise as much money as possible, because I wasn't rich and I didn't have the money to go to like a $500 dinner in the 80s, you know, for GMHC. I just didn't have that kind of money. So I put on a show where everybody could come for $10 and feel like they were participating and giving back. And that's how it all started. And, you know, I just got back from Italy where we celebrated Italy Bears last week in Milan. And it's in its fourth year. And it was sold out, 1,700 people, 120 dancers, hundreds of people backstage volunteering, and the spirit of that community and how it's come together. And my friend Giorgio, who put it all together, and his husband Mauro, who directed it. I'm just so proud of them because they called me about 5 years ago and they said, could we do an Italy Bears? And I said, yes, we can. Here's what we need to do it. And they did the work. And it's been sensational over there.
Well, one of the reasons it means so much to men of our generation that you've worked so hard for the fight against AIDS is not only because we lost so many friends in the 80s and 90s, but because really it's a miracle that we didn't get AIDS and die. So I feel
Yes.
we owe it to the community to do everything we can, don't you think?
Yeah, and also, you know, people are still becoming HIV positive. It's not gone away yet. And once someone becomes HIV positive, an organization like Broadway Cares Equity Fights the AIDS is there for those people to support them with food, medicine, housing, anything that they will need should they not be able to get it themselves. And that's what's so great about Broadway Cares.
Jerry, when you look at your career and body of work, are you having the career that you envisioned for yourself when you first started dancing?
I'm having more than I envisioned for myself, much more. And I just feel very grateful.
You created a company called The Original Production, which facilitates local productions of your shows by teaching your choreography.
Not just my shows. We have Jersey Boys, we have Addams Family, we have other shows. We have our own version of Guys and Dolls, our own version of, we have the junior versions of some of the shows like Annie, with Peter's original choreography taught by his daughter. So we have many, many versions of shows that they can lease the original choreography for their productions in their high schools. When I was in high school, I wanted to do the original production of West Side Story. I didn't want to do my version. I wanted to do the Broadway version because I wanted to be on Broadway. And so I thought about those young people, and I said, with the tools of the internet and streaming, we can get to them and give them the original choreography, and they can use it and not only use the steps, but understand the meaning behind the steps. And that was my intention with the original production.
It's a very important contribution to education. I'll bet you would have loved to have a service like that when you were in high school.
Yeah.
Will you ever sit down and write a memoir?
I don't know. Maybe someday, but
you're too busy living in the present to contemplate.
Too busy living, right?
So what's next for Jerry Mitchell? Are there any upcoming projects you can tell us about?
I have three. Well, I have two, but 3, 4, maybe even 5. But I'm going to tell you about one. The next one is Boop the Musical. It's based on the cartoon character Betty Boop. Susan Birkenhead and David Foster, lyrics and score, and Bob Martin book. And we are in pre-production and design and casting. We'll be in Chicago in the fall, I think around Thanksgiving to the New Year, and then hopefully on Broadway in the spring of 2024. And it's thrilling and exciting. Bill Haber is lead producer, and he's incredible. And so far it's just been an absolute joy. Zane Mark is my musical dance arranger, and he's back with me, and which is so exciting, from Full Monty and Never Gonna Dance. And Daryl Waters is involved with the music department, overseeing everything. It's been incredible so far.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. When I was doing my research, I learned that you're quite fascinated with the royal family. Is that right?
It's true. I was fascinated with Queen Elizabeth, really.
Oh, Al, do you see the potential for a musical about all the drama we've seen with the royal family in the last few years?
I think the movie's coming out called Red, White, and Royal or something. It's a gay love story. It's very exciting. I can't wait to see it. Did you read the book?
I have not read the book yet.
Oh, it's a great book. Yeah. So there's a movie coming out. I hear it's going to be scandalous.
Maybe there's a potential for a musical. Who knows?
Maybe.
Well, Jerry, it's been an immense honor having you on our show. Thank you for all the fabulous entertainment you've brought us. Thank you for everything you've done in the battle against AIDS. Congratulations on this award you're going to get on June the 11th, which I hope we get to see on television.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen. I think they're having a big meeting today, so we'll find out.
Well, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to appear on our show.
My pleasure, and it was lovely. Thank you for having me.
Our guest has been the brilliant director and choreographer, Jerry Mitchell. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver, my director of programming, Deborah Batsafin, my PR director, Laurie Towers, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.